So the amendments to the Constitution are all important to our country's history. The first 10 amendments were all put together and they were ratified all at once, and it was a way to compromise so that the Constitution itself would be ratified, because then these particular rights would be protected so that the states that were worried about those kind of things felt good about it and then ratify the Constitution. Since that time, and we're talking a long time, there haven't been very many amendments. One of them that we're going to talk about today is the 14th Amendment. This one's been talked about quite a bit over the last couple of years. So I'm going to start by giving some kind of overview of this amendment and then explain why it's coming up now in current conversations. So after the Bill of Rights was ratified, we have only had 17 amendments in 232 years. It's not very many. 13th Amendment was very significant. This one was ratified in 1865, right after the end of the Civil War. It outlawed slavery. Okay, so that seems like a no-brainer to us today. Civil War ends, frees the slaves, it's in the Constitution, that's official. Until the end of the war, though, slaves were not considered people. They were considered property. So now that they're freed, how do we get them the rights that they deserve? That's what the 14th Amendment tries to do. So Congress passes the 14th Amendment the very next year after the 13th Amendment. It took a couple of years for enough states to ratify it, but it did happen in 1868. So this amendment is all about citizenship. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So there's two parts to this one. You have the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause. Although this was specifically written to make freed slaves citizens, it does protect all of us as U.S. citizens. So every citizen from that point forward will have the protection of life, liberty, and property. There have been many instances in our history where states have attempted to kind of get around this clause. We'll get into that in later videos. But for now, let's talk about the due process portion of the 14th Amendment. In 1973, this due process portion of the 14th Amendment was what determined the historically significant case of Roe v. Wade, which made abortion legal in the United States. 7 of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court agreed that the right to privacy was a right that was protected by the 14th Amendment, and thus protected the right to have an abortion. We all know that last year, the current Supreme Court decided in a 6-3 decision that the right to an abortion does not fall under the right to privacy. So they overturned Roe v. Wade, 1973. It was basically decided that it's a private matter, and that's protected by the privacy, the right of privacy, they said, according to the 14th Amendment. Often the Constitution is vague, and it's done that way for a specific reason, and it's so that it can be interpreted in the future to meet the needs of a society as it has changed. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment changes Article 2 of the original Constitution. Article 2 had what was known as the 3/5 compromise. Southern states had smaller populations than the states in the North. And so when they started talking about how do we set up Congress, and they were going to set up the House of Representatives based on population, these states that didn't have a very big population were pretty upset about it. So they made a compromise and they said, okay, Southern states with lower populations, you can count your slaves, but they're not a whole person. They're only 3/5 of a person, or 60%. So that's what was in the original Constitution. Article 2 of the 14th Amendment changes that because we don't have slaves anymore. So they are not 60% of people, they are 100% of the people, and that's changed in the 14th Amendment. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment establishes criteria for being eligible to hold federal offices. This section was necessary due to the Civil War. It says, no person shall be a senator, or representative in Congress, or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So, in other words, if someone had fought for the South during the Civil War, and they had already, before the Civil War, had served as a senator. When you serve as a senator, you take an oath to uphold the Constitution. They're saying, you broke your oath, you can't serve again. So this one is coming up again today, and it's talked about quite a bit lately. January 6th, 2021 was supposed to be a rather humdrum day in Washington, D.C. Congress was going to accept the electoral votes, the Electoral College votes, and officially declare that Joe Biden had won the presidency. This happens every time there's a presidential election. We vote in November, the Electoral College meets in December, and then in January, Congress accepts the electoral votes, and they declare the president the president. As the meeting was starting, hundreds of Donald Trump supporters stormed the Capitol to try and stop the votes from being accepted. They believed that the election was stolen from Trump. Why would they think that? Because Trump had said it many, many, many times between the election in November, right up to just minutes before the mob marched to the Capitol. They went straight from a Trump rally at to the Capitol following Trump's orders. They were outside in Washington, D.C., and Trump was getting them all worked up. Several other people spoke as well, and Trump told them to march to the Capitol, so they marched to the Capitol. Eventually, order was restored. The votes were eventually counted and certified, and Biden won the election. So what some constitutional experts are now claiming is that Donald Trump cannot run for president again because he engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. You could say, well, he wasn't there. Did he give aid to them? Is he the reason that they went there? Did he incite them? This is interesting because they claim that Trump doesn't even have to be convicted in a court of law to be disqualified. The 14th Amendment doesn't say that. It doesn't even say how to determine it. What it does say is if someone's determined had taken an oath and wants to run again, 2/3 of each house of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, if 2/3 of them vote, this person can then be elected. Maybe it's going to be the same thing, that if 2/3 say he did support this insurrection, maybe that's what it would be. I really am not sure how this would work. This was specifically put into the Constitution to punish the worst offenders of the Civil War. It was probably pretty easy to agree at that time that someone fought for the South, so they can't serve in Congress. To place it on today's circumstances would probably be much more difficult. Either way, we can see the 14th Amendment is an extremely important and relevant document to every citizen in the United States. Its future interpretations could change the course of history.